Sounds good.
Uh, cool. All right. Good afternoon. This is Robert Lilligren, Chair of the Metropolitan Council Community Development Committee. It's Monday, May 17th, and before I call this regular meeting to order, just remind folks that we're still under COVID-19 and Governor Walz's peacetime emergency, and so the Metropolitan Council has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct in-person committee meetings. And so this will be conducted by WebEx, and they'll be recorded. Members of the public will be able to monitor this meeting by going to the agenda online to view the live stream. The video is embedded on the website. And just remind folks, we'll call roll, and Michelle will call roll to establish a quorum in just a moment. And please just use the chat function for technical difficulties and not part of the substantive conversation and debate. We want people to be able to hear everything that we say. And so if there are no questions on that, I will call this meeting to order. And Michelle will please take attendance by roll call to ensure we have a quorum. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. And I received advance notice that Council Member Lindstrom had a work conflict and will not be attending today. So I'll start with
Thank you.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chambliss,
Here.
Cummings,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Lee, Lilligren,
Here.
Musse, Vento,
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We have a quorum. The first item on our agenda is approval of our agenda, and you can see the posted agenda. If there's no objections or changes, then we can move on to our business.
Mr.
Any
Chair?
objections or changes? And who was that? Councilmember
Judy?
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just propose an addition to the agenda, not substantive for today, but if we could put under business, maybe item 3 after our official business on comp plans and such are done. I'd like to add an item where we would bring back the project-based voucher discussion that we had recently. Maybe it was already a couple months ago, to our next CDC meeting on June 7th, where we can, again, more fully engage the public in that discussion. We've had some outreach by stakeholders, and I don't believe it would be appropriate certainly to add it tonight with such short notice and without noticing it to the public so that other stakeholders could be engaged. But since it was an informational item brought to us in the past, I think it would behoove us to put that one back on the agenda for further discussion and consideration by CDC members. That would be my motion.
Chair, you're muted.
Mr. Chair, we can't hear you.
Right, sorry about that. And so, Councilmember, so I'm understanding, so your proposal is that we would bring that to the next CD committee meeting, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that'd be correct. And because of Memorial Day, it gives a 3-week window for everybody to better be prepared, including staff, stakeholders, public information on it, and then our own staff so that they can best be prepared.
Okay, cool. So you made it in the form of a motion, or we can just make the commitment to do that. I'm fine either way. If you'd like us to vote on it, we can.
Well, Mr. Chair, without objection, I would be happy with that. Either way works for me.
Let's just, we'll just make that commitment. Is Director Barajas on here? You heard the direction, Lisa?
Yep, Mr. Chair, I did hear that. Thank you. So we will aim for our June 7th meeting. And did you want us to bring that for further discussion or as an action item, I guess is where I would ask for your direction.
Mr. Chair, my motion, thank you, Mr. Chair. My motion would be for it to be a potential action item, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Thank you.
But we'll just do that, Judy, if that's all right with you.
Way hunky-dory with me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So what is the action item again?
Mr. Chair, I can restate. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, please. No, please do. Go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion would be then to add to the June 7th CDC meeting the discussion again of project-based vouchers, the program that we instituted last year. And then it would include then for an action item potentially and then including engaging notice to the public and other stakeholders that were involved in that process, so other developers. So we've been, Beacon certainly has reached out to all of us, but there were others that were impacted by that. And because it was an informational item brought to us previously, there was no opportunity for public engagement with the full CDC. So this would remedy that.
I still don't understand what the action is.
Well, maybe we should do it in the form of a motion. So Councilmember Johnson is moving that we put on the June 7th CDC agenda the item of the voucher. I'm sorry, what was it, Judy?
Project-based voucher program.
Project-based voucher program, and for discussion and reconsideration. It sounds like, Judy, that's what you mean, right, Councilmember Johnson?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. So it's not for this item tonight, but the only way that we can get it on the next item is to have, you know, the body ask for it to be put there. So that's why I'm asking for that
Okay.
to be
All
added
right,
to
let's
the
do it
agenda
as a
today.
motion. Thank you. Okay, so that's a motion by Councilmember Johnson. Is there a second?
Vento seconds.
Thank you. Is there discussion? Councilmember Chambliss.
I am still not clear what we are reconsidering.
Maybe I'll look to Director Barajas to sort of frame this for us, if you would, please.
And Mr. Chair, just to
Yeah.
the point of clarification, Councilmember Chambliss, thank you for your question. It's actually not reconsidering. What it's doing is allowing public engagement on the item, since it was informational only, and there was no way for public to engage with the entire CDC. So that's the difference, is just bringing the item back so that we can have public engagement on the topic.
Hey, can you, so we're amending the motion then?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, that was part of my
Yeah.
motion.
So do you want to, Councilmember Chambliss, would you like to hear the language of the motion again? Maybe, I don't know, Michelle, did you? Were you able?
Excuse me. Yeah. Okay. The project-based voucher program was an info item. So there was no motion on that. There was no vote on that. And what you're talking about doing today is just adding an item to a future agenda, and you'd like to vote on it as part of the business agenda today, correct?
Yes, for clarification again, we're not doing anything with it today, but it's simply to add that item back for further discussion and public engagement on June 7th.
Okay, and that's where if you want to have it as part of the business today, you could vote on it. Otherwise, Director Barajas and staff could just take it as a suggestion for a future meeting, and there would not have to be a vote on it. That's my thought on that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't care how the item gets added to the June 7th meeting, as long as it's committed that it will show up there and that it can be a business item and that the public is encouraged to engage should they choose to do so.
Okay, we have a couple hands up. Council member Chambliss and Wolf.
Yeah, if it's a business item, then we have to vote. What are we voting on? I'm still asking the same question. Why is it a business item? Why can't it just be either public comments or information? But I'm not seeing what we're voting on.
Mr. Chair, if I may, so there was action that was taken via consensus by staff, and that was to do nothing, which in and of itself was action. I think, though, that if the CDC were to, have the opportunity to bring this item back up, receive public comment, and choose to act differently than they would under business item. And I think for me, as a member of the CDC, I was thinking this would then go to Met Council for a vote, but it didn't. And I'm not quarreling with necessarily the mechanisms on how we brought it up, but I think because it generated significant interest, that should we choose to do something different than we did last time, it should be a business item rather than informational.
Robert, you're still muted.
Thank you. I've been doing that a lot today. I apologize. So that is different, Councilmember Johnson, from just bringing it forward to allow for public participation, right? If it's going to be an action item, we'll want to notice that. So that was a little, yeah. So let me recognize Councilmember Wolf, and then we'll keep sorting this out. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we're going to do this at the next meeting and talk about it again, I want to make sure that we have all the information numbers wise from staff on how many people on our regular waiting list have been getting through each year and how many people are not because of the project-based vouchers kind of bumping them out of priority. Because project-based vouchers come with the ability after a year to move and get a regular voucher if the person wants to. And that was part of the discussion last time. But I want numbers because the people who are in the waiting list for vouchers are not going to show up and comment. The only people that are going to comment are people who want project-based vouchers. And I want us to have all of the information at our hands if we're going to discuss it again next week or next meeting.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chair.
Councilmember. And I see Director Barajas taking notes. So I'm assuming you got that, Lisa? Great.
And Mr. Chair, I
Councilmember
fully
Johnson.
support that. I do want all the information as well, so that, again, this is just an opportunity as a business item for us to reconsider should we want to. We never took a vote. It was kind of via consensus, but it also then does allow the public, whoever they may be, the opportunity to address this as a group. So absolutely, any information, the first report, any additional information, the more the better.
Got it. So that direction is heard and understood. Any other comments or discussion? Okay. I'm not seeing any. So great. So now going back to the agenda, if there are no objections or concerns, we can consider it approved. Go to vote. Cool. Any additions? Hearing none. The next item on our agenda is approval of our minutes from the May 3rd regular Community Development Committee meeting. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Vento moves approval.
Wolf seconds.
Councilmember. Thank you, council members. Any discussions, additions, corrections? Hearing none. Michelle, please call the roll on our minutes.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item carries. Oh, and just note, I did get a text from Councilmember S. Ingebrigtsen. She's running late, but she will be joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And we will move on to our business items for today. The first is 2020-103. It's a Square Lake Special Recreation Feature Master Plan from Washington County. And Cullen Kelly will present. Mr. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Lilligren and council members. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, Mr. Kelly. Thank you.
Great. As was stated, I am Colin Kelly, planning analyst, and I'm here to present the Square Lake Special Recreation Feature Master Plan on behalf of Washington County. I should note that Connor Schaefer, Washington County Parks Planner, is also here today and may respond to questions at the end of the presentation as appropriate. Next slide, please. Square Lake is located in the northeast part of the regional park system in May Township in Washington County. The figures on the left and in the center are figures 1 and 2 in the staff report. At 25 acres, Square Lake provides several recreation opportunities, including scuba diving, swimming, fishing, lake access, picnicking, and hiking. The figure on the right is figure 3 in the staff report. Square Lake's designation as a special recreation feature stems from the pristine water of the lake itself and high-quality swimming opportunities. The lake has some of the clearest water in the Twin Cities. Next slide, please. A technical advisory team was created for interagency collaboration, review of existing conditions, and discussion of improvement opportunities at Square Lake. In addition to Washington County staff across multiple divisions, the team was made up of representatives from the organizations you see here on the left side of this slide. Engagement tools used during the planning process included a dedicated project website, the county newsletter, a pair of online engagement efforts, targeted stakeholder outreach, and listening sessions and site visits with underserved populations. As a result of this outreach and engagement, the county compiled common public engagement outcomes, several of which are shown here on the right side of the slide. Some of those outcomes include protecting and enhancing water quality and clarity, improving non-motorized watercraft site amenities and programming, and preservation of the natural scenic setting. Next slide, please. Washington County focused on engaging existing and potential park users within a 30-minute travel shed or driving distance from the special recreation feature. Compared to the overall Washington County population, disparities in Washington County park and trail visitation included age, household income, educational attainment, and physical or mental ability. Compared to the 7-county metro area, disparities in county park and trail visitation also included race and ethnicity. The plan recognizes the impacts that past decisions have had on the present-day inequitable outcomes experienced in the regional park system. For example, the historic segregation of access to swimming and the development of swimming abilities by race and ethnicity. To reach a diverse cross-section of the community, the project team provided information to the public in a variety of ways with an emphasis on trying to make it easy and accessible for people to participate in the planning process. The project team also supplemented engagement strategies with additional outreach. For example, listening sessions and site visits were conducted with representatives of underserved groups, including Latinx park users and people with different abilities. All feedback received was synthesized into themes and goals that guided the plan. 17 of the 23 plan recommendations directly address input received from underserved populations. Those recommendations are listed on page 10 of the staff report. The targeted engagement led to a more inclusive master plan. Through this process, the county was able to create relationships and build trust with community stakeholders. Underserved groups were followed up with as the final draft plan was out for public comment, and the county will continue to engage the community on the implementation of the plan. Next slide, please. To further improve park resources and accommodate growing demand, 2 locations near Square Lake have been identified for potential acquisition. The figure on the right is figure 4 in the staff report. These sites were identified for their ability to address project goals and match the criteria for Square Lake being a special recreation feature. One site being considered is the Golden Acres RV and Picnic Area, a 9.5-acre site immediately south of the existing park. Acquisition would provide additional natural resource protections to the lake through conservation and restoration. The other site being considered is the 55-acre Wilder property on the northwest shore of the lake. This parcel is largely wooded and was previously used as a youth camp. Acquisition of this property would provide additional protection to areas draining to Square Lake. Next slide, please. Community and partner engagement signaled an interest in enhancing the park's infrastructure to address stormwater runoff while also enhancing the park's ecological qualities. A non-motorized watercraft launch and rental opportunities are proposed north of the existing boat launch. Other accommodations include improvements to the existing boat launch and new signage educating park users about aquatic invasive species. Additional features would include a small group picnic shelter by the fishing pier, improvements to the fishing pier to better accommodate people with different abilities and needs, and expanded shoreline fishing amenities. To better provide for visitors at the swimming beach and picnic areas, the plan calls for renovation and expansion of the beach building, which will meet or exceed Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, standards. Improved access is also needed from parking lots to this facility. The development concept also includes restoring shoreline and adding trails. More detail on the development concept can be found on pages 14 and 15 of the staff report. Next slide, please. Square Lake is a special recreation feature because it provides access to some of the clearest waters in the metropolitan area. Therefore, protecting the water quality of Square Lake is critical. The park is dominated by several wooded areas surrounding open areas that have been developed into lawns for use by park visitors. Upland areas of the park are dominated by mixed woodlands, planted pine stands, and oak savanna. Field surveys noted opportunities for oak savanna restoration, pine grove management, prairie restoration, shoreline vegetation restoration and protection, and invasive species control. An adaptive management approach is recommended to preserve and enhance the unique resources within the park. Next slide, please. The total estimated cost for acquisition, development, natural resource management, and contingencies is $13,711,554. Approval of the plan does not commit the council to any funding at this time. Further council action is required to authorize state and council funds for regional park implementing agencies. Next slide, please. The Square Lake Special Recreation Feature Master Plan is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, particularly Planning Strategy 1, Master Plan requirements, as well as other council policies included in Thrive MSP 2040. Next slide, please. The proposed action before you, then, is that the Metropolitan Council approve Washington County's Square Lake Special Recreation Feature Master Plan. I should note that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission voted unanimously to approve the proposed action at its meeting on May 6th. With that, I will stand for any comments or questions you may have and remind you that Washington County staff is on hand as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for the report and for your work on this, and our thanks to the Washington County staff as well for being here and for being a good partner. Questions on that report? Questions or comments on that report? And if you want to just speak up, I can't see your images right now for some reason. Any questions? Hearing none.
Council
I'm
Member
sorry.
Lee has a question, Chair Lilligren.
Thank you, Michelle. Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a quick question about the scuba diving. I imagine it can be a pretty expensive sport, and so I was wondering how we'll make something like scuba diving in the area be more accessible and affordable to everyone who wants to learn it. Because I imagine being a landlocked state, we're not a lot of folks are exposed to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Kelly, do you have a response, or do you want to turn to our friends from Washington County?
I'd be happy to pass it over to Connor Schaefer if he's available and has any insights there. It's a good question.
Mr. Schaefer, any insights for us, please? Mr. Schaefer.
Excuse me, Connor, I think you might be muted.
Connor, are you there?
Yes. Can't hear him though.
We're not hearing you if you're speaking, Mr. Schaefer.
How about now? Is this
Yeah.
through?
Now, yep.
Am I good?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for the patience, Commissioner. Chair, and this is a really great comment and question, and something we talked with our public about throughout our public engagement. The opportunities that we are hoping to provide in the future are demonstrations and partnering with some of the great outdoor scuba diving vendors that exist both in Washington County and throughout the metro. that this lake is really popular. One of the few in the metro area that you can get your scuba certification here. So for beginners, this is a great lake to be introduced to that type of hobby or activity. So absolutely, we do have, as part of our development um, recommendations, is a facility that would provide rental options and also facilitate partnerships with organizations that we could do some demonstration projects for people who are new to it. But I think that's a really good comment and something that we look forward to addressing, kind of on the programming side when we're able to acquire the parcel. That would make it a lot easier, which is that Golden Acres parcel that's currently really used primarily for scuba access. So that would be part of probably the first step to providing that service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saber. Councilmember Lee, thank you. Further comments or questions on this report? Any further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Kelly proposes that we approve Washington County's Square Lake Special Recreation Feature Master Plan. Is there a motion, please?
Wolf moves approval.
Thank you, Councilmember. A second?
Vento seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That motion is adopted. Thank you, Councilmember Lee, for the update. I don't hear any thumping sounds, but it's good to know in case we do that it's your niece and nephews. Sweet. So our next business item then is 2021-116. It's from the city of Orono. It's the Orono Crossings Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and Jerome Benner will present. Mr. Benner, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council members, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. As Chair mentioned, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Jerome Benner, here to present the Comprehensive Plan Amendment for the City of Orono regarding the Orono Crossings Amendment. Next slide, please. As shown in Figure 2 of your staff report, Thrive MSP 2040 identifies the City of Orono community designations of urban suburban edge and rural residential. The area affected by the amendment, highlighted here in red on the map, is located in the emergent suburban edge area of the city. Emergent suburban edge communities are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at average densities of at least 3 to 5 units per acre for new development and any redevelopment. Next slide, please. As shown in Figure 1 of your staff report, this map shows regional systems in relation to the amendment site. Next slide, please. Council members, the major components of this amendment are as follows. The amendment has to do with re-guiding 3.69 acres from high density residential to urban high medium mixed use density residential, and along with proposing a proposal to adjust the 2020 and 2030 forecasts that are related but not limited to the proposed developments for population and households in the 2020 period, and then households in the 2030 planning period. And the overall purpose of this amendment is to accommodate a 37-unit residential development. Next slide, please. As shown in Figure 3 of your staff report, the amendment changes the land use from high density, which has a density range of 20 to 25 units per acre, to urban high medium mixed use density, which has a density range of 10 to 20 units per acre. Next slide, please. As shown in Table 1 and 2 of your staff report, the proposed city sewer service forecast increased in 2020 for population and households and increased in 2030 for households. The proposed changes are underlined here on the tables, and this forecast change consequently changes the city's affordable housing need calculation. Next slide, please. Table 3 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the city. The amendment results in a slight decrease in the overall density of the city from 4.18 to 4.01 units per acre. However, the city does remain consistent with the council's land use policy for emerging suburban edge communities. The changes associated with the amendment are underlined on the table in this slide. Next slide, please. Table 3 from, Figure 4 from the staff report illustrates the land guided for affordable housing for the city. As mentioned previously, the proposed forecast change impacts the affordable housing need number. The increase in population in households previously forecasted for 2020 decreases Orono's projected growth between 2020 and 2030. Therefore, the city's share of the region's affordable housing need decreases from 154 to 85 units. The city does still have sufficient, has sufficient units possible to continue to meet their affordable housing needs. Next slide, please. Mr. Chair, council members, I recommend today that the proposed amendment for the findings conform to the regional system plans, is consistent with council policies along with the proposed forecast changes, and is compatible with the plans of the adjacent and affected jurisdictions. And I recommend that you take proposed actions to authorize this. Oh, my apologies. Next slide, please. Been ahead of myself. Thank you. Council members, Mr. Chair, I recommend that you take the following actions. 1, to authorize the city of Orono to place its comprehensive plan amendment into effect. Revise the city's forecast and sewer service forecast upward in 2020 and 2030 as shown in tables 1 and 2 in the review record. Revise the affordable housing need allocation for the city to 85 units. And lastly, advise the city to implement the advisory comment in the review record for forecast, transit, and wastewater. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Benner. Any questions on that report, committee members? Questions?
Councilmember Chambliss.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. I might be a little bit confused, but I think what I understand is that there is a housing development that is going to change their plans such that they won't have as many affordable housing units in the future, or with the new urban residential designation, high density, urban medium to high mixed use, that's going to accommodate their 37 unit residential development. Is that more luxury housing? Therefore, they have to change the designation to meet the affordable housing goal? I'm not exactly sure what's going on here.
Sure, Mr. Chair, if I may. Thank you.
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, this amendment is kind of two-part in a sense. So in one instance, you have the re-guiding of the land from the high density category to the urban high medium mixed use. So in that particular case, that does change the essentially removing more acres of the city's high density to a different land use. So that does reduce the city's the affordable housing need number. Now, in relation to the forecast, the city felt that they wanted to have a more consistent alignment with their utility numbers for the forecast development. So initially, the council proposed a forecast that was lower than what the city is currently at for the 2020 period. So that was essentially the need for the forecast revision there. Does that answer your question? Maybe perhaps Director Barajas could provide additional context if needed.
It sort of does. I mean, I know there have been cases in my city of Brooklyn Park where we thought that we would have maybe high density development come in, and when that didn't happen and another developer came in with a different idea that didn't have as much density, then they chose to go with that opportunity. Sometimes the economy changes and these things happen, but I'm just trying to get clarity on what what caused the change or why it was initiated.
Mr. Chair, council members, Councilmember Chambliss. Yeah, so it's essentially this particular development does not have any affordable housing in the sense where there's a certain cost associated over a certain amount of time for this project. So while it could be affordable for the area, there is no affordability component to this project. So it will be market rate. But as far as the need for why the city decided to reduce this guiding land use, I think it's mostly just maybe to fit the dynamics of the site would be my assumption. But perhaps if there are other comments from my manager Angela Torres or the director, I'd be happy to pass it to them if they have additional input.
Yeah,
I
thank you,
think
Mr.
you've covered
Brenner.
it well, Jerome.
Great.
Well, anything to add, Director Bras?
Nope, Jerome covered it. Thank you.
All right, good job, Jerome. Further questions or discussion on this report? Further questions? Hearing none, Mr. Brenner has proposed that a series of actions to authorize the City of Orono to place its comprehensive plan amendment into effect. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Johnson moves.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember. And any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That motion carries, and we have finished our business items for today, and we'll move on to our information items. The first is the 2022 Community Development Budget Initial Discussion, and Ms. Augustin Jr. is here to present. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Council members, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So today I'm not going to have numbers to share with you. This is really just going to be a discussion to make sure that when I start laying out numbers, that I'm laying those out and the related information or others in CDs, lay it out in the way that you really want to hear the information so that by the time you need to vote on the budget, you're comfortable with how we presented it to you and you feel like you've got a good handle on it. Next slide, please. So we're really, really early in budget development. So what we've basically been doing, in the latter half, or probably the last couple months of last year and really gearing up to now, is we've been doing a lot of staff budget development analysis. And we've been working on the operating budget, taking a look at what's been going on at the legislature, what's going on at the federal level. There's just, with COVID, it's a lot different year still this year than it has been. So there's a lot of uncertainty. So there's just a lot of different factors that we've been tracking, both on what kind of revenue we're going to get and how we're going to, and on our expense side too. We've had a lot of projects planned for 20 that were then pushed to 21, and we're taking a look at, well, what were we planning to do in 21 that may impact the 22 budget too. So this gives you a snapshot of committee level conversations that we have got planned. So tonight we'll talk about our general approach, and then starting in June, we'll come back with more targeted topics and a more targeted budget. You're going to see that there are a lot of places in our calendar where it says targeted topics to be determined. We have some suggestions of items that we would like to bring to you. We also anticipate that there will be some topics that you're going to ask us to bring forward, and we'll make sure that we do that. Just a quick reminder, we'll be focusing on the operating budget predominantly until kind of later in summer, where we switch to more of the capital conversation. Quarter four, we'll be spending a lot of time on the Metro HRA. As you know, the federal budget calendar doesn't play really, really nicely with the council calendar, and a lot of those discussions just end up happening in Q4. Q4 is also when we'll be starting our annual division work planning and then finalizing that in Q1 21. So when you look at the CD budget, just as a reminder, a lot of your investment in the CD division budget is in us. It's the staff, it's the direction for what you want us to work on. So that division work plan is an integral part of our budget. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to walk through today is a really brief high-level recap of what I presented and shared with you last year. We have a couple recommended changes and anticipate you may ask us to change other items. And really the bulk of the conversation today is hearing from you. Again, then up next will be in June, and that's when I'll really talk about some numbers and other items that you may ask for. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go through just 3 or 4 slides from 21. So one of the things that, as you were getting grounded as council members and learning about all the different programs and all the different units, a lot of the budget presentation was just kind of a refresher on what the units are and what our major functions are. One of the recommendations and the direction that we'd like to move in the 22 budget, now that you've got a really good idea of what we do, is focus a lot more on performance. So, you invested X number of dollars in this program. What value did that provide to the region? So just a slight shift, and not to say we didn't talk about that last year, but make a more concerted effort to talk about the budget investment in community development, how that benefited the community, how that connects to Thrive MSP 2040, how that connects to the policy plans that we all operate under. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that really developed last year from your feedback. So again, these dates are intentionally out of date. This is just what I shared with you last year. And this list grew and developed through our conversations last year. So as we heard feedback from you of, when you talk about topic A, B, or C, we'd really like it framed this way. So you asked us to frame our conversations in how it relates to the council's regional role. You asked us to provide analysis and research and disaggregated data whenever it's possible or available, to really focus on equity impacts, to talk about the general economic conditions, not only what is COVID doing to our budget being the council's budget, but the broader economy. Looked for us to identify a way to leverage funds where it was possible, and to identify places where we could have timely financial impacts. One of the ways that you're seeing the timely financial impacts is some of the strategic council investments that you just decided as a broad council to make. So as a community development committee, you'll recommend our budget, and then as a broader council, you invested other dollars. And this year it was really a focus on equity related items. Our budget being CDs, was a beneficiary of that. We'll have about $4 million more to put into the LHIA program in 21 because of that. You also asked us to look ahead whenever possible, knowing that last year the crystal ball was super murky because of COVID. It is still fairly murky, but it is getting clearer. So really taking a close look at forecasting what's happening with our revenues and expenses, doing our best to tell you what we see on the horizon, keeping a close eye on state forecasts and what's coming out of session. That's something we're all closely watching watching these days too, and taking a look at what items CDC might want to put forward for the council targeted initiatives. This was a developing list last year, so that's kind of the base that I'm planning to start from. If you could go to the next slide, please. So last year we took one of our first initial stabs at really summarizing how equity shows up in the community development budget at large, at a high level. And it was a lot about, just kind of as a reminder, that the columns in green is the money that goes out either through HRA pass-through or our grant programs. And you really impact the budget there and the equity investments through the policy plans. You know, you've been through a lot of these policy plans now, scoring criteria in our grant programs, project-based vouchers was a conversation earlier today, and how we do outreach and grant programs. Equity also shows up in our annual work plan through our strategic initiatives, through our equity change team, and how we spend our money in contracts and consulting. So I would say this was our first stab last year at the high level roll up for our whole budget, knowing that a lot of those detailed equity conversations were happening at the program level. Kind of, you know, each of those little the sub bullets in there is where more of the detailed equity conversations happened. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was the snapshot. So there's two discussion slides. One is, you know, so at the high level, is that the way that it was helpful for us to communicate with you about the budget? So there's kind of four major functional areas that the budget presentations tend to come to you in. One is that first slide, the division responsibilities, and really shifting from focusing on helping educate you in what the units are and how that money is spent to how does that help us perform as a division to meet the needs of the region. The budget framing slide, that's the second slide that I walked through, it reflected your feedback in 2021. I'm interested if that still meets your needs. The equity slide that I just showed you, you know, last year we had detailed equity conversations at more at the program level, and at the budget level, we talked about it more globally. I'm interested to know, does that meet your needs? And then the last item, and I did not put this up on slides, it's your very standard pie charts showing expenses and revenues so that you can see what our funding sources are and where those dollars land. In 21, we matched those as close as we could to what you saw at the council presentations. We're not recommending any changes there for the sole reason that when you go and transition to committee of the whole or management committee or to full council meetings, that you're seeing the financial information shared with you in the same way and consistent way throughout. So I guess I will pause there for any feedback. And then after we have the conversation on this slide, then we'll transition to kind of some targeted topics that you'd like us to walk you through this year.
Thanks, Heather, for framing this discussion. And so Heather's put some questions for discussion before us. Committee members, comments, responses, and again, I can't always see all of you, so if you'll just speak up, please.
Councilmember Chambliss, I'm very pleased with thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased with how this has been laid out and how you have incorporated the council's ideas and feedback. This is what continuous improvement looks like, and I'm looking forward to getting into the details in the next parts of the presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further input for Heather?
Mr. Chair, Judy?
Please, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is really great. I echo what Councilmember Chambliss said. And then the only other thing, which, you know, it's budgeting, so we're setting the blueprint, you know, for the year and beyond. But I'm just always curious to how, you know, we're tracking based on the budget as far as it relates to our top goals. So, you know, we've got our 4 big goals, and equity, of course, is woven into this. But, you know, sometimes it's just nice to see when we're building our budgets how we're trying to, with our resources, impact the goals. And we talk about it a lot, but I just didn't know, because we've also talked about putting a dashboard together to track our progress on our goals. And I always think it starts with budgeting, so that we know where we're putting the resources are making a difference, which I know they are. But, you know, it's just a thought of mine is more and more people try to weave those high level goals, you know, into the conversation as they do their budgeting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, responses to the questions for Heather? Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question might be better suited for later, Heather, and if it is, I'm happy to wait, whether it's later tonight or at in another conversation. But I'm curious as to the resources that are available to guide us in this conversation, that provide us some insights as to the potential impact of COVID and the economic issues, particularly as it relates to housing and income security. So as we go forward, to the extent that it's possible to avoid traumatic surprises for everybody, that we do that. I don't know how to ask it any better than that. I don't know if looking back to 2008, 2009 can give any kind of a glimmer, because that was a totally different sort of circumstance. But whether it's through the Federal Reserve or the real estate industry, but I look at the ever increasing prices that people are getting for homes, and the hot real estate market, as well as just changes in how people work and whether kids are going to school or not, and if mom's going to be able to go back to work, and how that all kind of shapes the impact on housing. I'm just curious as to what resources may be there and whether they can guide us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I would note that on the next slide, Heather's teed up a question about COVID impacts on the community development budget. But I think to your point, and I have the same kinds of curiosities, right? It's not just sort of the funding streams, that were impacted, but really a more holistic look at the region, about what I'm sure are going to be surprising and dynamic impacts of COVID on housing, like you say, Councilmember Bento, but just on the regional economy, and that'll impact us more than just the really strict the funding streams, federal funding streams, state, our own. So yeah, I concur.
Yeah, oh, I was just like, Chair, committee members, I completely understand and appreciate the spirit of that. And as a finance director, that is one of the reasons I am so grateful to have folks like Joel and his research team, and Terry and the amazing housing team here, and the Livable Communities folks that support housing too, because getting this feedback is helpful, because then we can make sure that we go back as a team. And the budget presentation might not be me, but it is making sure that we are weaving in those related factors that do impact our budget and impact the residents that we're serving. So thank you for your feedback. It's all very helpful, and we'll do our best to weave all of it together into a package that is it sequentially makes sense as you're making your decisions.
Thank you, Heather. Further input for Heather, or are we ready to move on to the next discussion slide? Any further input? Heather, the floor is yours.
Okay, I guess I will ask if you could go to the next slide, please. Right, so as we were just talking, a lot of the budget conversations that we're going to have might not be me leading. There are so many topics in community development where there is such close integration between what's going on regionally and how our budget intersects with that. So one of the things we wanted to do today is to give you a preview of kind of staff-driven items that we want to bring to you, and issue the invitation that if there are other items that you would like to talk about, that we will get to know what those are now, so that if it's something that we need to go back and it's going to take some work on our part, that we've got enough lead time that we can pull things together for you. So we definitely want to talk about COVID impacts on the CD budget and on the broader region. Our Livables community staff are working on a potential pilot program that may be a potential area for investment this year. There's a lot going on with Metro HRA that you've heard about. There's the Metro Mobility, sorry, this is the problem with sometimes being in transportation. I accidentally call Metro HRA Metro Mobility, and I switch the metros around, so sorry about that. So the Metro HRA demonstration program, the home purchase and disposition policy. So there's some really, really cool piloting going on right now that Terry will be back in front of you to talk to about. But we Last year, we kind of started to dip our toe in the water of purchasing homes, and the council authorized money to buy the second side of a townhome. So there's going to be some continuation of that conversation. We will be back in front of you to talk about rent limits and an analysis of the small area fair market housing rent initiatives that, the timing and the implementation of that got delayed slightly because of COVID. We'll be back to you to talk about Parks Capital funding and in particular, one program that we have, Future Reimbursement Consideration Program. There's some IRS rule changes that have come about that we're going to have to react to. We'll be back to talk to you about that in more detail. We're also gearing up for what will come after Thrive 2040, the 2050 Regional Development Guide. So even now, we're going to be starting to gear up to make sure that the council is in a good space to put that together. And with that, I would open up the floor, that if there's other items you're interested in making sure that we talk about, that we get those on our list.
Thanks, Heather. So another question, what other conversations do you want as part of the 2022 budget process? Committee members. And again, please just speak up. Committee members? Well,
Mr. Chair.
Heather, yeah, please, Councilmember Bento.
Mr. Chair, I've had too much caffeine today, so I apologize. Another weird thought, but I'm wondering if in the course of this, there's any possibility for us kind of inviting partners to give us their feedback as it relates to the question I raised earlier about just the economic impact, so that we're inviting developers and nonprofits and other HRAs, other organizations that we may not be directly interacting with on housing, but have this experience, to just share what they're learning in the midst of all this. Kind of a, not so much best practices, but maybe helpful data, sort of talking with, schools, senior centers, just to find out about trends and things that may not be showing up otherwise. Weird request, I acknowledge.
Chair, committee members, many of us are broadly connected in our work. So, a lot of those conversations are happening all over with numerous staff in the division. Let me take that request back and see if there is a way to somehow package it in a way that makes sense as part of our budget conversations.
Thanks, Heather. Further input for Heather on other conversations we want to have as part of the 2020 budget process? Committee members? Heather, one thing I would say, and this, I don't know if this is the most concrete sort of suggestion, but just acknowledging how long change can take within government, and especially as things sort of wind their way down from the federal government, and we'll be a year into a new administration by the time this budget gets up on its feet. And so I guess to answer your question about other conversations, I don't know that it's a whole other conversation, but some consideration of what may be happening at the federal level as well as just the state level, and acknowledging again our process is annual and takes time. So for me, it would be affirming, I guess, to kind of be keeping an eye at what's coming out of the new administration at the federal level. And then the other piece, and again, I know that this is a separate conversation and you kind of touched on it, but sort of to the Councilmember Bento's point as well, but so much, it seems like so many resources are being directed through a lens of resiliency, which to me is kind of the active part of equity. and looking to communities that were most impacted by COVID. And just in my experience in my day job, kind of touches on some resources, both public sector and philanthropic, that are being passed through this pipeline with this idea of resiliency. And it's very broad kind of definition. And I've been gratified by seeing what's considered sort of a resiliency investment and how they really are sort of equity investments as well. So I guess this, as we talk about what's changed with COVID, that we have this resiliency filter as well. Thanks.
Can I chime in, Chair?
Yeah, please, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I had somebody knocking on the door, but I did want to talk about page 5. You talk about resiliency. I don't know if that's similar to sustainability. I guess sustainability is part of resiliency. So I think looking into that is really important. On page 5, it says, to focus in on the framing in terms of the data analysis and research and the equity impacts and leveraging the funds. You definitely want to get into more detail about that and how that looks, and take that to the next level.
Thank you, Councilmember. I had someone at my door a little bit ago too. The joys of working from home. Further comments on what we would like to see as part of the 2022 budget?
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
just one quick last comment from me. Heather, so will the economic framework does staff refer to that, or because there's the housing affordability piece of it? And so when we do things, now that we've got that document in place for the region and our partnerships in all of that, does that help to guide anything that we're doing, or are we hearing from partners, what some of their feedback is at all around housing, since that's a piece of it?
Chair, committee members, I may defer to either Lisa or Terry. I see they're both on this call. So I like, for example, I'm connected with other finance directors around the country trying to figure out how to integrate equity better into our budget and, how to do better budgeting. I'm a step removed from this specific housing question, so I may hand that off to one of my colleagues.
Thank you, Heather. Lisa or Terry?
Sure.
Comment?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, actually all of the council's adopted policies and documents guide our work. So the places where we've identified things that the council will do and commit to are parts of our staff work plan. So those are some of the things that, as Heather's talked about before, and we've talked about in past budgets, so much of community development's work is staff focused. So you're really investing in staff to carry out those items. So I think maybe it might be best to give you a better and more complete answer by coming to you with an update on what we've been doing since adoption of that economic framework, and just give you an update on all of that activity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I've got
Further
one
discussion, Councilmember Chambliss. Yep.
Thank you. So for the equity in action, which is on page 6, I believe, the management committee and the BIPOC committee and some of the staff have been looking at how we're doing our contracts, consulting, and support for MCUB businesses. So I think we really need to look at what our strategic plan is to see how much money needs to be allocated towards that. Is $2 million enough? Does that need to be higher based on what needs to be accomplished? We saw some disparities within MCUB and have to look at a strategy for addressing those racial disparities. So at some point, I think we probably need to come up with our strategic plan before, so that it fits within the timeline that was mentioned for our budget schedule.
So, council member, could I follow up with a question just to make sure that I'm understanding? So
Sure.
in the community development budget as a whole, we have about $2 million of consulting work that goes out like that. That's our total budget. So are you looking for more description of how our consulting dollars are specifically with MCUB vendors? Or I just want to make sure that I'm fully understanding what you're looking, or are you looking for us to make sure that we're actively coordinating with procurement and OEO to make sure that we are understanding what the broader strategy is so we're implementing that in our spend?
Yes,
Okay.
the latter. Understanding the broader strategy so that we're implementing it, because procurement might not be the best and only approach to supporting the MCUB businesses, especially if there's a mismatch between BIPOC small businesses and large contracts. You know, if we're looking at procurement for large contracts, but 95% of the BIPOC businesses can't handle the large contracts, then we got a mismatch. So just if the 2 million is just for consulting, then I'd like to look at what other ways we can support contracts and consulting from an equity standpoint besides just consulting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Heather,
As
did you get
it
clarity?
pertains to the budget.
Cool. Further comments for Heather on the 2022 budget discussion? Any further comments, committee members? Oh, yep, go, Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, this probably doesn't fit with our status quo of doing things, but did we hear from you, Ms. Bento? Okay, I missed it. She's looking like she's thinking really hard, and I was just like, okay, now I want to get some jewels from you.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Bento, anything to add? Yeah, please.
Councilmember Chambliss, be careful what you ask for.
That's all right. I'm not afraid. Bring it on.
Well, I guess I just wanted to say thank you for the feedback. This is not the one and only time to do feedback. So I just, so one, I'm gonna kind of share that framework every time we meet. So, and as we hear things, we will take things off, add things on as we need to. If anyone wants to discuss an item in particular, feel free to reach out to me. I just want to make sure you've got the information you need as you go forward in the budget process. So thanks for the initial feedback. It's very appreciated.
Thank you, Heather. We look forward to the ongoing conversation. And then moving on to our second and final information item for tonight. It's an introduction to the Regional Park System Historical Cultural Study. And it looks like we have a trio, so Ms. Kinney, Ms. Lovely, and Ms. Lee. And I'm not sure who to call on to introduce this. Is it you, Mr. Mullen, or?
It's me, Amanda. Lovely.
Amanda, please, Ms. Lovely.
I know it's hard when there's three of us. Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Council members. Today we'd like to introduce the Historical Cultural Study. First, I'd like to start by introducing our team that's presenting tonight, which again is Tracy Kinney, Jessica Lee, and myself. The overall purpose of the study is to help everyone to continue working towards our imagined future of a welcoming and inclusive regional park system. We know that history matters and that it shapes today. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with these two flags that were part of a half-day workshop that I led as part of the art shanty project that we did as regional parks. This project can take many forms, and these are just some of examples of some of the forms that the regional cultural study could take. The slide on the left is by Marlena Miles. She's a self-taught Native American artist located in St. Paul. When describing her flag, she said the flag colors are the diversity of our city, coming together as inner hoops through the movement of indigenous whirling log geometry, which represents humanity and healing. The center morning star and the floral designs are knowledge and growth we gain through rebuilding positive relationships and our connections with nature. The slide on the right is by Whit Sayasoko. Whit Sayasoko has been actively engaged in the intersection of arts, civic process through a variety of roles as an artist, graphic designer, and art educator. In explaining his flag, he stated, "As a person of color, I don't see myself in many advertisements," speaking directly to non-white audiences. So when designing this flag, I wanted to make sure that people of color are figuratively and literally at the center of the image. One of my favorite things to do at a regional park is to simply hang in a hammock with my family. I find this to be a universal activity and one that could speak to many others. In terms of design, I tried to keep the colors bold and the images simple so that the viewer could easily recognize the scene from far away. As a team, we're excited about the historical and cultural study and what forms it might take on. I'm now going to pass to Tracy.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. Hi, I'm Tracy Kinney, Senior Planner in Regional Parks and Community Development, and today I will be talking about the historical cultural study. Greg, could you advance the slide, please? Fantastic. So where did this come from? Well, first, I just wanted to mention that you are at the beginning of the conversation. This is the first conversation that we are having with our council policymakers. We've had a few other ones, and I'm excited to kick this off with you. This is not the first time we heard that history is important to equitable usage in a regional park system. History has come up a number of times, both through our recent amendment of the public comment period of the Regional Parks Policy Plan that was approved by Council in December of 2020. And then also through the equity analysis requirement, both through the development we heard from you, our council policymakers, and then also through the implementation, we heard from our implementing agencies. So before you is a quote from Urban Roots, which is a local organization that is youth serving, located in St. Paul. They submitted a public comment in the form of a letter through the public engagement pilot program, and they were just really emphasizing how history is very important and meaningful to them, and to be able to see themselves in the regional park system. They would like to understand the land better and how their place in the land and how the park could then better reflect them. And through the equity analysis requirement, we heard how history is very important, not only the region's history, but how the region's history has created today's inequities and continues today's inequities. I also wanted to mention that history and culture provide the context that shape the present moment, people's lived experiences, and the regional park system today. It's this contextual detail that is so needed to serve our region's residents in a holistic, place-based way. Not everyone feels welcome nor valued. Imagine if this project could continue our equity efforts through joint learning, building and continuing relationships with regional organizations, and move the ball forward through meaningful and attainable ways. Next slide, please. So here before you is the policy context. This is where it's rooted and where it comes from. As I mentioned, this was placed in the policy plan during the amendment period of last year, and it came straight from the equity analysis requirement. But as you can understand, history has an intimate connection to equity and an intimate connection to how our parks and trails are implemented and how people see themselves in the park system when they come and visit it. So how it's stated in the Chapter 9, the work task, is before you. It's to describe and document the impacts that inequitable policies have had on the development of the regional park system. And then the text goes into developing a land acknowledgement that recognizes and respects Indigenous residents and histories of the land where our regional parks and trails are located. I really wanted to note and focus on the equity analysis requirement, which is really the impetus of why this came into the policy plan. The equity analysis requirement, as you may recall, is for parks and trails master plans, which are long-term development plans that the agencies must engage the public on. And the equity analysis requirement is focused on having a better engagement process that ensures that people across the equity thrive spectrum of age, ability, national origin, race, and income can all have an equal stake in the public participation process. So 1B of the equity analysis requirement focuses on what is known about future stakeholders, underserved populations, and how the region's history created present-day inequitable outcomes. That's then translated to the work task item in Chapter 9. So I wanted to focus on that because we are looking to provide tools and guidance to our agency partners in relation to 1B of the equity analysis requirements, which essentially is the data collection component of this response from the agencies. And I also wanted to note too about about the land acknowledgement component of this. This is this is an item that is very important to us and our evolution of thought and understanding and learning on this topic, both with our internally with our staff and externally with our agencies. We recognize that the governor has recently in 2019 executed an executive order that the council then responded to in relation to a government to government relationship with our tribal nations in our region. We in so doing, he also requires a tribal relations contact at the council. The council responded, and we do have both of those items. We have a tribal relations coordinator, and I'm not saying that correctly, and I apologize. And then we also have policy in relation to government coordination. So we will be working within that context as we look to build our relationships with our tribal nations and Indigenous communities across the region. What I wanted to note is that land acknowledgements are not mere acknowledgements. They're very serious commitments to our important stakeholders in the region. And while land acknowledgements are a good goal to shoot for, we will commit to building those relationships within the context that we can and look to build meaningful outcomes that are jointly arrived at. That is not necessarily merely a land acknowledgement, but hopefully a little bit more than that. But we can only move at the process at the speed of trust on this one. So more on that in the future, and I thank you for listening to me on that. Right now, I'd just like to pause and ask for any questions, and I'll continue forth.
Thank you, Ms. Kinney. Any questions at this point, committee members? Questions? Hearing none, Ms. Kinney, please proceed.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Greg, could you advance the slide, please? So what is this? What is this process? Well, as I mentioned before, this is about tools and guidance for the equity analysis requirement. This is about really helping the agencies feel as though they have the resources available to them to answer 1B of the equity analysis requirement. This is a deeper dive into our continued efforts on equity and a pivot and a deepening of our conversation around history and culture. So this is a continuation of our collective efforts. This is far more about process than product. This is about engaging both internally with staff, with you, our policymakers, with our agencies, and with our regional organizations across the metro area. This is also about mutual learning and building relationships. This is also about, finally, about creating meaningful and useful, attainable outcomes. And what I had mentioned before, this is strongly related to the equity analysis requirement, providing resources and guidance on 1B of the equity analysis requirement. Next slide, please. So what could this be? Well, this could be a myriad of different things. This could be a lifting up of recent events that continue to bubble up and a peeling back of the layers of that through a lot of intimate engagement, both with organizations, the public, our agencies, and us ourselves, and the documentation of that. This could be more about a place-based inquiry that is rooted in the National Park System. The National Park System has a template for historical context studies that engage organizations through a stakeholder advisory committee and various other strategies, as well as you would be engaged, the agency would be engaged, but this is more of a template process that has a strong rooting in the history professions, and we can learn more about that. Or it could be something else. It could be a living website. It could be a podcast. It could be a series of all of these things. What we are interested in doing is better understanding what is needed to answer 1B of the equity analysis requirement and then responding to that. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about our process. Next slide, please. So this whole year is a scoping of what this project is going to be. As I said, you're at the beginning of the conversation, and I'm really excited to host a couple of other meetings with you so we can dive deeper and answer any of your questions offline. So we're off over to the left. This is a continuing imagining and deepening of this conversation on equity and pivoting towards history. We're at the visioning stage. So right today, Jessica is going to preview with you the vision, mission, impact, and outcome things that we've been talking about. And then those are going to, those conversations are going to continue, evolve, and be refined as the scoping document is developed. The next phase is the assessed and co-creation phase, where we're going to be working intimately with our agency partners and you to develop the scoping document, which is essentially the meat and potatoes of an RFP that's going to go to hire a consultant for 22 and beyond. We're looking to hire a consultant to then conduct and implement the various ways that we're going to attack the guidance and tools for the equity analysis requirement 1B. And then, we're going to continue that journey. And beneath all of the phases here are all the stakeholders, you yourself and the agencies and us at play. And I also wanted to mention that we have 2 technical committees to be working on the details of this as well. So next, Jessica Lee is going to preview with you the vision, mission, impact, and outcome, and then we'll go back and talk a little bit more about the timeline and what's going to come next. Jessica, would you like to take it forward?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Lee. Welcome.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right. Good afternoon, council members. For the record, I'm Jessica Lee, Senior Park Planner. As Tracy mentioned, we have met with agency partners, our internal staff technical team, and the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission to begin brainstorming and discussing what we want this project to be. And now we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. One of our focused conversation topics has been around our vision statement, or where we want to go, what we want to aspire to. How do we answer the question, what does an equitable regional park system look like? One example of a vision statement could be to prioritize the region's underserved population's sense of belonging by centering their culture and history. We'll be asking you for your thoughts and ideas on this in a few minutes. Next slide, please. We've also explored our mission statement. How will we achieve the vision? What is our core purpose, our present situation, and the cause of the situation? How might we achieve an equitable regional park system? Perhaps by lifting up cultural, historical, and systemic narratives, or by supporting actions towards a more equitable system. Next slide, please. Next, we have our impacts. What long-term effects are we striving for? Maybe mutual learning, collaboration, relationship building, sustainable support for marginalized communities, possibly culminating in historical, cultural, and systemic stories that are alive in the planning, design, and programming of our parks and trails. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the outcomes. What are the deliverables we could produce from this project? Some ideas are tools to help agencies address the equity analysis requirement, accountability indicators, an accurate history narrative, and awareness of sacred and historical sites. Tonight, we are asking for your thoughts and ideas around what do you want this project to be? How can we achieve it? What are the long-term effects we should strive for? And what deliverables can we produce? After the conversation tonight, we hope to have a better understanding of our vision, mission, impacts, and outcomes. But before we jump into that discussion, Tracy will briefly cover the next steps. Next slide, please. And back to you, Tracy.
Thanks so much, Jessica. So I just wanted to show you again that this is the timeline, and we're really at the beginning of the conversation. And we're excited to kick off this conversation with you. We are in this whole year, we're scoping out the materials for the RFP for the consultant for 2022. And we fully anticipate that this is going to go into potentially 2023 and beyond. Next slide, please. So here are the next steps. We are here in the imagining phase with you. In May, we will be meeting again with our agency staff technical committee and with the partners again soon in June or September. We're going to be moving into the creating phase, which essentially is that identifying our needs and gaps and working on that draft scoping document, and then we'll be bringing that back to you in November. So sometime in the fall, we're anticipating November, we'll have an information item on the draft scoping document for both MPOSC and CDC. In the interim, we will be hosting offline smaller group meetings so that we can dig into some details, and we'll follow up with you on that. And with that, we'd love to engage you in the conversation and hear your thoughts on the historical cultural study today. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Yeah. So my thanks to you all for your work on this and for the introduction to the Regional Park System Historical Cultural Study. It's going to be an interesting journey for sure. And I'm sure this committee and this council will be very interested in participating and following the progress. So any comments, questions on what was just presented to us, committee members? And please speak up. I can't see you for a moment here.
Chambliss.
Please, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for the presentation. It's nice to see people out in the outdoors with the illustrations, and also, you know, just seeing how we can do even better. From a standpoint of, since this is a historical and cultural study, it's important to, you know, I think help our immigrant, indigenous, and African American cultures get back to their history in terms of the earth and nature. I mean, something just kind of popped into my head, like, what if we have a rites of passage that connects with some of our regional parks? working with some of the organizations that currently do a rites of passage, which is part of the African tradition, both for African immigrants and African Americans. Um, um, how do we bring that back? And we can use our regional park system to have exercises on rites of passage, meaning the rites, typically it was the rites of passage of young male boys into manhood. We could do the same thing for girls, of course, bringing it into the modern day. But that might be a way to get folks to use our regional park systems. Um, there are kids that grow up not learning how to ride a bike, not having access to a bike. If we can get some bike riding programs for youth and access to bicycles, I think that would be very good. I mean, it's kind of shocking to even imagine that you can, have an adult that never learned how to ride a bike, but it does. So just figuring out, I mean, now we have these mechanisms where we're able to rent bicycles and scooters and things like that. If we can figure out a way to do that with our regional bikes system, our regional systems and trails, then maybe we could bring people to those trails. And whether it's through summer programs or schools, um, there's a lot of things that we can do. Sometimes we get kind of so into our usual way of thinking and doing that sometimes we can be more innovative in how we address issues. So I would encourage us as we do these plans to help people think out of the box, understand history and culture, and how to bring that back.
Thank you so much for coming.
Excuse me, Chair Lilligren. Councilmember Lee has his hand raised, and then
Great.
Councilmember Johnson just raised her hand. Thank you.
Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Johnson. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks to this wonderful presentation by the staff. It reminds me of a wonderful documentary I saw recently. There's a powerful story out of Canada relating to this kind of work. There was a tribal, a First Nations movement, led by the First Nation movement, to ban grizzly bear hunting in British Columbia, Canada. And along the way, they faced many obstacles. And one of the indigenous organizers um, went to get these hunting maps that were being given out or sold away at public places, and he looked at the map and he realized that the map was missing spots where black and grizzly bears were noted to be nesting by parks federal officials. And so he went up to like the National Parks Office and he said, "You're missing some spots on these islands where we know there's some grizzlies and some black bears here." And he was in a moment of arrogance, he was dismissively kind of pushed aside, and they're like, "You can't tell us where they're grizzlies and they're or not grizzlies. We're the experts here." And, and he said, "Well, I've been living on this land all my life, and I'm First Nations people, and I've even guided non-native people to go hunting and camping and hiking. I've done this all my life. I know what I'm talking about." And he was told, "Well, you're not a scientist and a biologist." But undeterred, he and his community went and found some scientists and biologists who were willing to come into their communities and work with them and identify and scout and prove that there were missing spots, populations of black and grizzly bears that the federal officials were not listing on maps. And so, anyway, long story short, eventually they were able to lobby the Canadian government to end grizzly bear hunting in all of British Columbia in 2017. But it took a lot of work, and my point is that it ties into this local firsthand knowledge of the people who are here first and here the longest. And a lot of when we talk about all sorts of like privilege and discrimination, we have to remember that the privilege of class and education, and that for those of us at the decision table where we have the power over policy, that we cannot and we should not dismiss or ignore people who may not have a fancy degree or sophisticated, certificate, but that doesn't mean that they know any less and that their local knowledge and expertise is any less important. So this is really interesting and great work, and so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two things. Would this go to the EQC in any form or manner to get their input or guidance or support? And then my second question is, it to me, and I don't know how it fits into this, but it's about access to our parks by, a lot of people that we want to encourage everybody to be using the parks, but there are gaps and disparities in doing so. I was at a meeting last week for mayors in my part of the region, and actually Three Rivers Park District Council member Marge Beard, and we were presenting, Met Council was presenting at that meeting, raised the point that if we could continue to work with our park board implementing agencies on how to better connect people that don't have a way to get into the park systems through our transit, that would be great. So, I mean, I think if that's more tactical, but just the nature of doing something like this, I think begs the question of, does everyone still then have access to these lands, and making sure that they are really truly available for all people.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of the regional parks are not located on bus lines. So how do we get them there? I think that it might be through having special programs that come into the city, that bus them from the city to the regional parks. It could be having collaboration with the regional park and the city. I know some council members don't like that, but sometimes you have to have equity in place to bridge those gaps, where you have, let's say, a community park where they have a field trip, twice a month, once a quarter, going to different regional parks. And there's a collaboration with the regional park and this urban park. So there's a lot of ways that we can bridge the gap if we're willing to be flexible.
Thank you, Councilmember. And maybe I'll give my comments right now, because they're kind of in the vein of what Councilmember Chambliss, Councilmember Johnson were just talking about. And so I don't know if this falls in sort of scoping or vision, but and of course the regional park system, we're most concerned with our 10 implementing agencies, and those often sit in communities with other sorts of parks, right? I mean, I think in Minneapolis you have neighborhood parks, and then the more regional parks, and it's about who has access to which kind of parks, but also who's using them, right? So in the core city, the neighborhood parks get used by the core city populations who, as Councilmember Chambliss is saying, may not have access to a regional park. I know that earlier this year, even, we had a discussion about funding because a regional park either went adjacent to or through a more local park that had more sort of activity kinds of amenities. And so I guess what I'm getting at is somehow acknowledging, including the relationship between the regional parks and whatever the more local park system is, and with an eye to that being a point of access, right, for people who aren't accessing our regional parks now. And again, I get it. We have, we're the stewards of this regional park system with our 10 implementing agency partners, and there's other things going on in those environments. So how do our policies, how do our programs best leverage other park assets in a community? And that's my input. Other input from council members?
Excuse me,
Well,
Chair
yeah,
Lilligren.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
excuse me. Councilmember Lee still has his hand up. I didn't know if he had another question.
Is that from before Chai,
I
or
think it
is
might.
Yeah, that
that?
was from your board. Sorry, I forgot to
Okay,
put it down.
no, that's fine.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
I can't put it. Thanks. And I keep thinking Councilmember Cummings is about to say something, and so I don't know, Molly, did you have something to say?
No, I think the presentation was great. It's
Okay.
exciting to be at the beginning of this planning process, and I think the comments that other council members have made with regard to this are very important and very valid, and I look forward to watching this and being a part of the discussion as it moves forward.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember. Any further input from committee members?
Excuse me, Councilmember Wolf has a question.
Thank you. I didn't even see that. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you. It's not a question, it's a comment on a couple of things. Dr. Raintree Salk several years ago had done a study with underrepresented communities trying to figure out what were they looking for in the regional park, and if they didn't go to them, why not? And transportation actually ended up pretty far down the list. It wasn't as big a deal as people keep wanting to suggest that it is. I think the bigger thing is to figure out what are low cost ways that we can make sure that everybody feels welcome and knows what they can do there. Because if nobody's ever taken you to a regional park, you don't know, is it free? Does it cost money? You know, what are you allowed to do? And so making it understandable, I love the history stuff that we're starting to see, but also making it understandable, but keeping in mind that we have a very, very limited budget for regional parks. Almost all of the operating comes from the park agencies, other forms of funding, be it property taxes or user fees or whatnot. So let's wring as much bang for the buck as we can and look at low cost things that we can do to make it more welcoming, because you know we can think about expensive things, but we just don't have the money. Even on transit, we don't have the money to expand our transit system to go to places that it doesn't currently go right now, for any reason. You know, we are not looking to add new communities to the transit taxing district and transit service area because we just don't have the money. So what are things that we can do that don't cost a lot of money, that we can make people feel welcome and valued and want to be a part of our system, is to me the biggest thing, because we don't have the money.
Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss.
Well, I think identifying the issues is important, whether it's lack of transportation or lack of money. If it's lack of money, what can we do to utilize our partnerships so to make some of the goals happen? Because, you know, maybe some of the money can come from our partners, especially if that's what we're doing, is partnering. So just something to think about, rather than to say, you know, let's work with what we got. And that's I don't think we have to do that. I think we can maybe find other sources or other partners that are willing to fund some of these initiatives.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Sorry, I forgot to ask my one other question, and I think I've asked this every time we're going to hire a consultant, especially on projects like this. When we hire the consultant, will be, you know, we always want to look at qualified consultants, and under that umbrella, will we be looking for consultants that have, you know, bring diversity, either personally or, you know, professionally in their experience or knowledge to this role? I just really think that that would be valuable, and yet I don't know what that industry looks like, but I think that it's just something that we should be, you know, trying to work into some of this as we delve into things that, you know, majority population, you know, might have been schooled in, but I think the original, you know, involvement in community and coming from diverse community and bringing expertise matters as well. So
Thank you, Councilmember. Committee members, further input at this point? And I really want to echo the thanks for the work on this. This is really tremendous, and in bringing this to us early, so we are involved in the process from the beginning. And I look forward to seeing how it works out. Ms. Kinney, Ms. Lovely, Ms. Lee, anything in closing?
Just in closing, thank you so much for all of your comments. They're all just fantastic to add and consider and follow up on. And we'll be back. And I look forward to our more smaller group discussions, and let's just continue the conversation. So thank you so much for this discussion tonight.
Great. Our thanks to you all. That concludes our agenda. And Michelle or Lisa, anything further for the committee?
I don't have anything, Chair Lilligren.
I also
Okay.
don't have anything. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Enjoy this beautiful afternoon, and seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Outside, thank you. Bye.